Hello, everybody. You've made it to lesson 3 in unit 1, so stop and give yourself a pat on the back. Good work. You're doing awesome. So our first two lessons focused on skills, right? The first lesson focused on being able to identify and explain the rhetorical appeals. Our second lesson built on that by being able to identify what type of claims there are and what claims are being used, and also identify what a claim is and how does it interact inside of an argument. And you've obviously displayed mastery, and here we are. So we're going to get into a lot more content that you will be using these skills to break down arguments, claims, and then decide whether the appeals being used are persuasive. Were they effective? Was this argument effective in persuading you to agree with an idea or whatever their main claim is? So what we're seeing right here is the piece that we're going to be analyzing. It's through This American Life, which is on the radio, and also it's a podcast. And they did a story entitled 3 Miles. To give you a little background on it, there was a program that brought together kids from 2 schools. One school is a public, and it's in one of the country's poorest congressional districts. And then the other is a private school that costs $43,000 a year. I mean, if you're thinking that's a lot of money, you're not wrong, because I'm looking at it and going, wow, I would love to make that at some point in my life, even a year. So that's like way more than I've made in a year for these students to go there. And the crazy thing is those schools are only 3 miles apart. This program that they put into place was they were going to move kids from the poorer school and give them some exposure to the private school and vice versa. The hope is that these kids connect, but some of the public school kids had trouble getting over the different divides, in where they came from, both kind of city and more rural, and also their backgrounds and their experience from being in a poorer neighborhood to a wealthier place, and opportunities that they are exposed to in those areas. So within this podcast, you're going to hear what happens when you get to see the other side, and it looks a whole lot better. Kind of like the saying, the grass is always greener on the other side. So the link for this podcast is in your class notebook. It'll take you to this webpage. And then if you scroll down on the webpage here, you can skip the prologue. It's only a minute, and I basically gave you all the background it would give you. So you're going to start off with Act 1. And you're just going to press play here on the screen on the left where my pointer is. So as you can see, it is 24 minutes long. And while you're listening to this, you are going to be actively listening by filling out an active listening question sheet. So instead of your notes that you've been doing currently, this will give you about 8 questions that are directly related to what you're listening to. And as you listen and come across some of the answers to these, you're going to jot down your answers. And your notes in this lesson are actually going to be your assignment. So after you actively listen through the podcast and fill out all these questions, then when you go to assignments, you're going to cut and paste your answers into the assignment Word document and submit it. So let me see here. Give you an idea of what your active listening will look like. So we'll go into your teams. into assignments. And your 1.3 assignment. So here's your 3 miles active listening questions. So as you can see, they're going to be asking you to describe what's going on in the podcast, but also to take from your experiences and evidence from the podcast to answer some of these. For instance, there's a student in the podcast named Melanie. She has a very strong reaction going from her public school to the private school. So one of the questions asks, why do you think she reacted the way she did? So when you come across that question, it's asking for your opinion. And just like when you've read these arguments and claims, you're going to make a claim about why she acted like this, and then you're going to support that claim with evidence from the podcast. And also you can use evidence from your experiences to describe why you think she acted that way. Let's see if we have another one like that. At the end of the episode, you're going to be asked what unanswered questions do you still have about this episode. So that's going to ask you kind of like in the what do I know? What do I want to know? You know, once you listen to this story, it's only Act 1. It's going to continue. But this is going to ask you to form some questions about the Act 1 to get you thinking about what things are unresolved in this story. What things are unresolved in this argument. What claims were made that haven't been supported yet. So start thinking about those when you're answering that last question. And also enjoy the podcast because it has a lot to do, and I think you're all uniquely made to answer these questions because these are students that are, you know, your age that got to experience these things. So as much as I can listen to it and relate from my previous experience, you're in it right now. So you kind of had the credibility, which is part of ethos, to comment on what they're going through and why your opinions hold so much weight on the matter. If you have any questions, if you have any trouble accessing the podcast, or really any difficulties within this, but especially with the podcast so you can get started, please let us know right away. Message Ms. Clifton and I can't wait to see your responses.